welcome. Take It Up with Jessica Lee. My guest today is Hang Black, who's VP at Juniper Networks. She's also the author of Embrace Your Edge. I'm delighted to have you here, Hang. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It'd be nice to talk about our appreciation of life in America, also our journey as immigrants. We'll bring about more peace and harmony in our society, especially given the recent violence against Asians.
Yeah, there's been so much language around division and so much misinformation about everyone's intent that I think it's important now to kind of humanize all the stories behind us, all the rich and interesting stories that make us all incredibly unique and collectively complete.
Let's talk about something we do have in common, which is being immigrants who fled Vietnam to America and the journey of the boat people. In 1975, communism took over Vietnam. Thousands of us fled. My family, we left on a little boat. We ended up running out of food and water. Eventually, we got to Malaysia, had to destroy our boats, forcing ourselves to be accepted. And we were put on a refugee island in Malaysia. We were there for 7 months on this little island, no running water, no electricity, definitely no smartphone or Wi-Fi back then. But pretty much, this it's like being on Survivor Island. But eventually we made it to America, and it's been a phenomenal journey that has really deeply shaped all of us. How was it for you in April 1975?
Well, so Saigon fell April 30th, 1975. My family escaped into the port of Saigon one day before, on April 29th. So we were literally standing in metal ammunition barges overnight as we watched the bombs fall over Saigon. And it was a pretty harrowing journey, which in fact started a couple of weeks beforehand when my father and mother were taking the kids down from Da Nang to Saigon first. That in itself, was a journey by boat where I actually was thrown from a tugboat onto a freighter that's multiple stories higher. And I was thrown from a stranger, caught by another stranger by one chubby little hand. So I could have easily died as a 2-year-old at that point. And then on land, when we did get to Saigon, and as we were trying to exit Saigon, it was my parents, the 8 children, so that's 10 of us, plus my father's parents, that's 2 more, plus the 2 subordinates that owned the car. So if you're counting, that's 14 people in the car the size of a VW Bug. Mm-hmm. And we were driving around for hours, getting detours around. We were trying to find safe haven, really, because with my father being a lieutenant colonel in the Army, we for sure, if we had been caught, we would have been, severely punished. So my hope is that we can share each other's experience. So again, we can humanize each other. But what I found was I grew up in one of the most racially charged states in the United States, and yet I grew up feeling very loved. It may have been the particular neighborhood I was in, the particular gifted and talented schools I went to, but I didn't really realize it until I got extracted out of that system in 3rd grade. I went to another state for almost a full school year, and the racism was completely prevalent there. And it was shocking to me. I was spat on, I was bullied, and it was unfortunate. But even at that young age, what I ended up doing was definitely standing up for myself anyway, educating people, and still being warm and friendly with them. So over time, that school, even the different populations of races that weren't playing with each other, I became their friends. And when I left, I'm proud to say they became friends with each other as well. But it was definitely a lesson that, don't mistake being in the South for just everyone being a racist, but it actually does occur. And when it does occur, it is pretty violent and devastating.
Racism is everywhere. I grew up in the Bay Area, and I certainly experienced it. My friends, immigrants, we all experienced it. So as a matter of fact, in seventh grade, I couldn't take it anymore after being harassed and being called names and all the kind of comments of like, hey, why don't you go back to your country? What are you doing here? You know, I exploded. I got into a fight and we ended up getting detention. But that event changed me. I realized it was a big lesson learned that I had to stand up and defend myself. And even though I think racism is everywhere, I do believe that in general, most people are decent, are kind, are helpful. And there are just a smaller group of people who are just making it very nasty for others. But I have faith that people are good.
Well, there are fundamentalists in every group. And the question is, how much do we let that take over the rest of the population? So for me, I generally assume positive intent, but I also think we have to educate each other and even ourselves on our own unconscious biases. I have them. I'm sure you have them.
Yes.
But it takes work to look at it. And in order to look at it, it's really about having those conversations, having those very uncomfortable conversations and uncovering what those biases are and how it affects you in your decision making every day.
What do you tell your kids?
Well, my kids have the misfortune of being with a mother who is very vocal on all things minority. So when I look at what a minority is, it's not necessarily race or gender. It's not necessarily what we see on the outside. Clearly, I am a female, I am a woman of color. But there's so many other things that people could be a minority. Are they partnered or not? Do they have children or not? Did they come from wealth and privilege or not? Do they have some sort of disability? Are they LGBTQ? There's so many layers of being a minority. So what I talk to my children about is really awareness. What makes someone not just unique, but special? What gives them their edge? And we've learned to we can have our opinions, but what we try to stay away from is judgment. And all we can do, I can't really control somebody else's actions. I can only control my actions and reactions.
Kids growing up nowadays, they're so aware, and I'm glad my kids are confident enough to speak up. But I would say that in the working environment, the corporate world, they have a lot to learn. So you wrote this book, Embrace Your Edge, and you share a lot of lessons for career advancement and leadership. You want to talk about it?
Sure. Well, especially with Asians, there's a lot of messaging to keep your head down, work hard, sit down and shut up, don't rock the boat. And what we have to learn is sometimes it takes a lot more than that. There is value to brand and networking. Our parents could teach us to work hard, all day long. They could help us with our homework. They could teach us about work ethic, but they didn't grow up in a corporate environment like America, where there's so much about connection. And I'm sure politics in Asia, other types of professions in Asia still need network and connections, but our parents didn't work in this environment. So what I talk about is, how do you do that? If you didn't have access, how do you create it for yourself? It's all about, if you think about access, it's about building credibility. You can build credibility with work, which works for a really long time, which is why we do it. And it works while you're an individual contributor. But as you're trying to rise into the ranks of leadership, you need that extra credibility. And credibility comes from two things: trust and competence. Where do you get that trust from? Typically, someone in your network gives you an introduction, or you go to a great named school. That gives trust, right? If I'm lacking those two things, what else can we do? Extracurricular activities, pad our resumes, etc. But if you don't have that coming in, what you can do is get really, really good at your job, right? You get really good at your job. That's the credibility piece. And then you bring other people in to collaborate with you so that everybody's working together and they know the caliber of your work. But the other piece around trust is like, the reason people are uncomfortable with people who don't look and sound like them is that our brains are wired that way. Our brains are wired to dislike anything that's different because it triggers the fight or flight response. So we have to get people familiar with us. That's where networking is important. Sharing your story is important. Authenticity and being vulnerable is important. So, and as far as making sure people get to know, I used to think networking was so awful. I got to go to this thing and I've got to shake people's hands. And it's because the way people network, they walk up, hi, my name is, hey, what can you do for me? But I've just learned to be really authentic. I think of it as, what if I'm going in and I'm meeting a group of friends or friends I haven't seen in a long time? Hi, Jessica. That's a cute top. Hi, Jessica. How are your kids? Tell me a little bit about you. Once I hear those stories, I'm caring about you more than I'm caring about what's going to be a result of it. I'm engaged with you. It's very authentic. That to me was how I learned to kind of get to know people. And by the end of it, if you're an interesting person, you're going to exchange information. You're going to, you'll talk about what you do for a living. You'll talk about where your passions and your joys are. And then you build that network of it's not just what you know, it's just not who you know, but it's who knows what you know.
Mhm.
So once you build that across and you gain a reputation that you've earned, by the way, it's not given, which is even more awesome. That's how you build your credibility.
It's true. I think that we tend to hang out with people who are similar to us. And there's a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would say it starts with your own circle of friends to make sure that you expand that to have friendship with other folks who are not like you in other circles, so that you do grow from learning from others.
I look at my own network all the time and I'm testing. I will say the one thing that's common in my network at this point, I always say I'm hunting for unicorns. So what's the thing that's the same about everyone that I know? They're typically multilingual. They are super smart and super creative. That's kind of what I look for. But aside from that, now my network is very, very different. I've got on my team, I did a recruiting video for my team and I had to cut out a bunch of people because I had too many women, I had too many Portuguese speakers, I had too many Vietnamese speakers. I have on my team, I have artists, sommeliers, chefs, dancers, musicians. So I look for that innovation, that creativity, and I try to make sure that, sometimes I actually do have to really go out and look for a white male because diversity begets diversity. And I keep getting, minority, which is great, but I want to make sure that I'm covering all aspects of minorityism.
On this talk show, my platform here, I also make sure that there's diversity, the guests that I invite on the show. I want to ask about traveling to different towns, given the violence against Asians. I asked because I'm about to go to New York. And for the first time, I'm feeling nervous. I'm wondering, what am I going to do to protect myself? Like, do I need to get a taser? Do I need to get a mace? I've lived in Europe, in the East Coast. I've traveled to a lot of places, but this is the first time I find myself thinking, gee, I really need to consider how I'm going to protect myself in case someone attacks me in the subway or as I'm walking down the street. It's sad. I have to think about it. It's like crazy.
It is. It's crazy, and yet it's incredibly expected and unfortunate. I will tell you, a few weeks ago, my car stalled. It was downtown. It wasn't a bad area. It was downtown and my car stalled. It was 8:30 at night. And I won't lie, I thought twice about getting out of the car. I called someone to make sure that they knew where I was and what I was doing. But it's unfortunate because it's been happening. And when leaders at the highest ranks feel that it's okay to advocate racist remarks, to advocate for violence, for verbal abuse, it normalizes that sort of behavior. So when we see that our grandparents have been pushed on the street, 1 or 2 a week, every week, for this entire last year. And it's probably incredibly underreported because, again, Asians don't speak up, right? They don't want to rock the boat. So I actually think that a lot of the violence has been extremely underreported. And we lost 8 people in March, but that's what it took. You know, if we could have had those statistics in any one given month, but because it happened in one day, that's what it took for people to take notice.
Mhm.
So the good news is that it feels like the communities are rallying together. And when I say communities, I mean Asian in itself is a giant monolith. Some of us are immigrants, some of us have been here for multi-generations. We represent 47 different countries, many different languages, many different, levels of success and privilege, of education, of completely different experience. If you landed in Canada, if you landed in West Coast or the center of the United States. So, it's bringing all those communities together to activate together. One thing the Asian communities, because there's so much diversity, one thing they haven't done very well is been organized to come together as one. And I saw that it has been happening over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And what's even more beautiful than that, our allies are rallying around us. Our Latinx, Black, and white allies are rallying around us, just as we are also rallying around those other communities as well, around Black Lives Matter, around other organizations. So it's great to see the different classes and minorities and majorities come together to support each other and really raise awareness that this is not okay.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to what I was saying, that I think most people are decent, most people are good, and it's sharing these stories that will break down the fears, break down the barriers, and will help to unite us more. Okay, last question. What's your motto?
Well, it's one that I've carried with me for a long time now. Control what you can, influence what you can't, and know when to let go of good to make room for great.
I like that. Well, it's been a good conversation. I appreciate you being on the show to share about your journey, share your stories.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a good conversation, and I hope that it helps expand future conversations about this very important topic.
I'm almost done with the book. So far, I love it. Embrace Your Edge. For those who haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. There you have it. Take it up with Jessica Lee, Hang Black, VP at Juniper Networks, and author of Embrace Your Edge.